Welcome everybody. My name is Alon. I'm one of the volunteers for Adams Morgan Day. We're happy that the day's gone so well so far. We haven't had any hiccups. We've had a lot of participation with folks joining virtually and in person. There is still time to see some of our folks at our tent, I believe in front of Marie Reed. I think they're still there. But we're wrapping up things here on the culture and history side with a really special panel that I'm excited about based on what I've heard. Just a couple of quick housekeeping items that I want to mention before we get started. I want to encourage folks to ask questions, whether you're watching in the Zoom meeting or on YouTube Live. Definitely send over any questions you have. We're happy to pass those along to the panel. The session is going to be recorded and uploaded to our YouTube Live. If anybody misses any bits or wants to rewatch or share with other people, it'll be live on our YouTube channel along with all the sessions from today. I think that covers everything. Check us out on social media. We're still going to have, like I said, a couple things before we wrap the day up. So check out, of course, our YouTube page to see the culture and history events, but also our Instagram is full of special events from the day, restaurant specials that are going to be running all week long. Check out our Facebook page because the Dan's Plaza has been quite a sight to see all day long. So a lot going on there. And those videos should be available after the fact also. And of course, check out our website, adamsmorganday.com. There's plenty of information on there about all of our events. I think that wraps it up. I'm going to turn it over to Jose here so that we can get started. And thanks everybody for joining. And Jose, thanks to you for moderating the panel. Take it away.
Great. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Jose Centeno-Melendez. I'm a historian, second generation Salvadoran American in the area. I also have some strong familial ties to Adams Morgan. I go back to the early 1970s, as does everyone else here in the panel. So it really is an honor for me in the conversation with everyone here today. As for those of you who were able to tune in to the 12 p.m. session, you were able to learn a little bit about the roots, the historical, cultural, and activist roots that really help form a dynamic neighborhood, especially in a moment of disinvestment and a moment of really a lot of things going on between white flight, between the ending of the 1968 uprisings and the arrival of so many individuals from throughout the world, really. But probably one of the most prominent presence was of folks whose historical and familial lineages go back to Latin America, the Caribbean, and Spain. So, if you haven't seen that panel, please make sure to watch it. It's really great. And today what we're going to do is we're going to be having a conversation with folks whose familial lineages and genealogies follow that tradition of making home in the neighborhood, or who have familial ties in the neighborhood from their parents, their grandparents, and seeing what kind of work they're doing. So today I'm joined by, I have Manny here, Manuel Mendes, who is the chair of the DC Afro-Latino Caucus. Manny is originally from the Dominican Republic. He moved to DC when he was 9. He is a graduate of Bell Multicultural High School. So we're talking local. He is also a documentarian, community historian, and a huge advocate for Afro-Latino, Afro-Latinx experiences, histories, art, culture, and politics in the city. I'm also joined by Veronica Melendez. Veronica is a visual artist, also based out of DC, who does photography work, who is an illustrator, and really captures iconic household products and photographs these quotidian, day-to-day lived experiences that are really personal, but also capture a really dynamic experience of Central American folks who have been making community in the city and the region as a whole. And I also have with us Christy Larrat. Christy is a community-based DJ. She has co-led and co-hosted a radio CPR community station for 5 years in Mount Pleasant. She's a community researcher. She collaborates on building spaces and really forming communities. So this is really a great group of folks. These are community leaders in many ways, shapes, and forms. And really the purpose of today's conversation is just to get to know a little bit more about them, and for us to really have a conversation amongst each other to see where our familial roots are, how we all came to interact with Adams Morgan in different ways, and what are the types of movements that have been led through the different vantage points that everyone is working in. So My job from here on out is just not talk so much. So I'm going to really try to set the stage over here to everyone who was with me. So the first question really is, if you all can really share a little bit about what are your familial ties to Adams Morgan, and what does Adams Morgan mean to you? And Manny, if you can kick us off, that'd be great.
My name is Manuel Mendes. I am the chair of DC Afro-Latino Caucus. And my ties with Adams Morgan, my grandfather lived on 18th and U Street, right beside El Tamarindo. And I had an aunt, or have an aunt, who's still living, who lived in the Mintwood, if everybody knows where the Starbucks is, right above. That is the Mintwood, and I have so many connections with Columbia Road, in particular with Zodiac, and yeah, that's just a little bit about me. I don't want to take too much time.
Great. Cristi, would you like to go up next?
Yeah, so this process of like preparing for this and talking with folks, you know, all of us have different relationships already through the work we do and the communities that we belong to, but have gotten to talk with my mom more about her first experiences in Adams Morgan, and was learning more about her living in a group house right across the bridge from Central Adams Morgan on Cathedral Street. So she came from Peru, had come for college, and then her ties to DC were like having a tia here, I learned, and she came looking for work. So as kids, she would bring us to DC, but we were based in suburban Virginia for most of my life. And so always kind of visiting and building community and connecting to spaces in DC as a guest, and usually around music or protests for social justice and movement work. And so even as like a young kid, and then as a teenager, and then my baby 20s, like was coming in, and those were like the places and pockets that I was building community until I then moved here myself. And I think like in terms of personal ties, there's been a lot of organization work that has come in like Mount Pleasant, Adams Morgan spaces, but I've also kind of gotten the experience of being like a South American Peruvian kid through like experiences in Virginia, and then more of like a pan-Latinx community vibe from my work and community building folks in DC.
Nice, thank you. And Veronica, if you'd like to share a little bit about yourself and what are your ties to Adams Morgan.
Sorry about this light. It's golden hour right now. Well, for me, my family, my familiar ties to the Adams Morgan area start in 1974. So my grandfather came to DC, and inspired by this, like Adams Morgan Day, I actually asked a few more questions with my family, and I found out that he actually lived on Florida Ave near Adams Morgan. That's where he like first came to. I had no idea. So I guess like I have even more ties to the area than I even thought. So that's where he came first, from Guatemala. And then I also, speaking with my family, learned just over the past few days that my tia, she had an apartment on Lanier Place by the fire station. And just speaking to her and hearing her stories about that apartment, she was like, I rented a studio, it was $200. We even had like a balcony. And she just made it sound like it was like it was like the spot. It was such a community centered area where everyone was just like making home, and it really felt like home for her. And it didn't take too long for that to become home. But yeah, that's kind of where it started. My parents came from Guatemala and El Salvador during the 80s as well. They lived closer to the Cleveland Park Metro in this apartment building, which is where they met each other at a bus stop on their way to the Carlos Rosario school. And yeah, I guess like that, my entire family just like lived around Adams Morgan, Cleveland Park, and Mount Pleasant, and we're just always revolving around these spaces. And I lived in DC till I was like 3, and then we ended up moving out to the burbs. And so I grew up in Wheaton, but even though like I grew up in Wheaton, Maryland, Montgomery County, like I would come back to DC all the time just because this was kind of like the hub of where they first found home in this country. And yeah, I think it's been interesting to see it change so fast. And just hearing all the stories of how it used to be and how it looks now, and me living in Mount Pleasant now and seeing just like the stark differences of how they still remember it being, and how they still think that I'm living in like in their centro, you know, and I'm just like, well, I don't know, you should come check it out. You know, it's very different now. Yeah, that's been a huge inspiration for a lot of my artwork, is just that the rapid changes that we see in the city, specifically in this area. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, something that's really caught my attention in doing this work, and well, let me start out by saying that for me, doing as a historian, encountering Adams Morgan was really like a personal re-encounter with my family history, right? Like I remember, yeah, I grew up in Peachy County in Hyattsville, but my pops, when he came in 1975 to reunite with his mom, who was here years earlier, he lived off of 18th and Vernon Street. And so just about every weekend, we'd go into Columbia Road, and I remember seeing a lot of vendors. I remember it being kind of like mistaken, because I lived in El Salvador for 6 years, and I remember thinking to myself, like, where am I? Like, am I still in some sort of like El Salvador or something like that? Or am I like where really am I? Because there's so many Spanish accents, majority Central American, but like I remember listening to bachata and all that good stuff, just, you know, seeing all the vendors in Columbia Road, and then having these conversations with you all, I'm realizing that there's like a lot of this personal ties that really propel you to do the kinds of cultural work that you're doing today and the organizational work that you do today. So with that, I'd really like to open the space up to see if you'd like to share a little bit about the kinds of organizing work that you have been doing, and really how you got involved in the type of work that you are doing. I'm looking at you, Manny.
I guess I'll go first. The work that I do is basically is just inspired by the lack of Black representation in the Latino community and in different spaces. For example, like the museums, the books that folks have published have only been really just like white Latino faces that, you know, been covered. And so one of the things when I came back from college, I went to Antioch, Yellow Springs, Ohio. I graduated with an Africana Studies major and communications major, focusing on documentary. You know, I first wanted to tell the story of youth organizing through my eyes of the times that I did youth organizing in at Bell. But then I wanted to focus on you know, my fight with you know, Central Americans and just Latinos in general with identity and making sure that, you know, Afro Latinos were documented. And so one of those big fights that we, and you know, Jose, we chose to really celebrate Casi la Luna. And we chose Casi la Luna because at the time, Casi la Luna wasn't, not much attention was being paid to Casi la Luna. Casi la Luna, the old guard, as I call them, folks that, you know, have been activists, they know who Casi la Luna is, and they know the contributions Casi has made from the Imperial Building to you know, Change Inc. Or just in general in the immigrant community. But not a lot of the newcomers, the new folks that are settling in Washington, D.C., they didn't know who Casilla was. So we focus on getting the old generation and a mix of the new millennials to really collaborate, right? And and think about new ways how we can bring Casilda Luna out. And we came out with her birthday, right? And so her birthday is like around April 4th. And we wanted to celebrate Casilda 93rd. I believe it was the 93rd birthday. And we wanted to, and so these are like, the pictures that you're seeing are like our organizing tactics, where we brought in both the old guard and the new guard. We brought scholars from Howard to talk about Black Latinas in DC and the things that they have accomplished. So you see Tonija from Howard, who is the director of the Bunch Center. You see Alicia Gil Sanchez, who's also a director. I forget what the organization is, and a professor, Dr. Aisha Court, who's a Howard professor in Spanish, just to talk about, like, you know, because I feel like Casilda is a blueprint for all our activist community. I wanted to reflect basically what Black Latinas are doing today, and share with the community. So my 9 to 5 is working at the DC Public Library. So we had like a gallery of like the festival of Casilda, old pictures of her, and a lot of the old guard, as you can see, came to see her, because most of the time Casilda's very her family is very protected, you know, and as they should, and you know, she doesn't come out as much, but Casilda is one of those blueprints, like I said, that we all should know in Washington, D.C. And so one of the big things that we wanted, or that we still want, is we want to have Corey Street named Casilda Luna Way, even as a ceremonial name. And so we went through all the ANCs, and all the ANC has accepted. Our next step is to go to the DC Council. I don't know if I'm going through it, but that's basically one example of our activism work in terms of the Afro Latinos in Washington DC, and making sure that the pillars, the people that set the foundation, folks who are in the community, know who they are and know the things that they've done. So, for example, Vida Senior Center, knowing that Casilda was one of the founders of Vida Senior Center, in the contribution of like that she made with LAYC, the contributions that she made with the festival, so that people know who Casilda Luna is. But that's one example.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I mean, I think it's really cool that like you're using the library as the space that it should be utilized as, right? Like a space of convening to bring folks together. And I also have some more photos here that you share. I mean, you're also a documentarian, and a lot of the work that I'm seeing you do really is like making sure that the richness of Latinx DC history is representative of what actually took place, for sure. I think I might also have, okay, cool. And I think I also have this picture here. This is like a little buffer zone, because there is a moment in time where Manuel and Christy intersect, their lives intersect. So maybe Christy, this would be a good opportunity for you to share a little bit about your work and your entry point into organizing. And if you can please talk about what these images are and what they mean to you.
Sure, thank you. So yeah, as I mentioned, coming into DC, and specifically like Adams Morgan, Columbia Heights, Mount Pleasant areas, was often anchored in music, arts and culture, and protest and movement building for social justice, often like combined, not like in silos. When I first moved to DC proper, I got to work at a labor union at the SEIU Local 32 Janitors Union as an ELL teacher. And I'd always wanted to be a teacher, and had done like my own baby versions of it as like a high school student, because I felt like it was a really cool way of building power. I felt like I learned in a classroom as a teacher as much as I did as a learner and a student. And this was like kind of the best example of that experience. There hadn't been like labor studies or like that type of education at the college or high school that I went to. And working alongside like daily organizing work in an organized way that was like on a national and a local level with a lot of Latina leadership was a really important experience for me as a young person coming in and learning how to be an ELL teacher, which was like a benefit that you got as a member of the union. And so that was actually one of the places that we taught was the SED Center, which was based in Adams Morgan over around the corner from where the Video Americane used to be, Calorama. It used to be on Calorama Road. So like I said, that was like an experience of adults building power. I think as a young person who had come in for protests, youth power was something I was really interested in. And because I started getting involved with Radio CPR, which I can talk about in a minute, and because this youth group, Youth Action Research Group, which is pictured here, had a show on Radio CPR, a youth power show, which I think Manny was on for a bit, powerfully so. This is a community radio station that was based at a secret location in Mount Pleasant, Adams Morgan area for decades. I was recruited into YARG as a youth organizer. And at the time, students who were in high schools at Bell, McKinley Tech, and other high schools were organizing around displacement. They were organizing around youth employment, the city's youth employment program, and other issues, learning how to do testimonials at city council, and just learning even meeting facilitation is like an important organizing skill. So that's what we're doing here. Actually, we're practicing meeting facilitation so that they can actually be leading and not have adult-led meetings with city officials. We were based in St. Augustine Church down on U Street. So YARG is one of the first initiatives that I get really involved in at a local level, and as a youth leader myself in DC. And as I mentioned, they're connected with Radio CPR. Natalie Avery was a founder of both YARG and Radio CPR, along with several other badass women. And Radio CPR was founded partly directly as a result of the voluntary agreements, which were these racist, anti-poor, anti-immigrant agreements that a small group of wealthy white homeowners in Mount Pleasant effected, kind of blackmail is not the word. What would be the word of twisting someone's arm legally? Basically forced Latino business owners to sign. And so Radio CPR tried to take up space on the airwaves as an act of civil disobedience to have a place for the music that was effectively banned by these voluntary agreements. It was can't have music playing live in establishments, you can't have dancing, you can't have DJs, and also to host a space to discuss these issues. And so another chapter of taking up space here was on the airwaves, and then realizing how powerful that was and playing a part as a radio station, which ultimately my friends and I were the next group of people to run the station for about 5 years, and organize to support the business owners to ultimately, after 10 years, overturn those voluntary agreements. So that was another big lesson of what media community and in-person organizing community can do to build power and resist gentrification and displacement, which I think is a big piece that all of us have experienced and seen and talked about in these areas. And I'll say the last piece that I'll mention is that from that and music always being so central, we actually got to DJ. This photo is a studio photo, learning how to make antennas, hosting house parties to raise money it was a totally DIY project, and then sitting on Mount Pleasant Street and having a core organizers meeting for Radio CPR. And because we all were DJs and then became party DJs from some of these projects, we ended up DJing out and got to DJ the first party at Hades after she overturned her voluntary agreement. And some of that led to founding Maracuya, which was an underground DIY queer Latinx party space that was trying to platform small touring musicians. And we did that for about 5 or 6 years. specifically trying to platform queer, Black, women, non-binary musicians who weren't getting booked at other places in DC, and cultivate like Latinx community around that. Thinking about like the ways that we connect on dance floors that can be super powerful, even if people think a party is like a luxury or like a dispensable thing when it comes to politics and community. So that's like, hopefully those through lines make sense. And I think we've been inspired by a lot of the things that Manny and Vero have been doing like at the same time in the city, and have gotten to connect because of that and because of some of those overlaps and connections that are naturally there.
Yeah, I'm really loving the themes that I'm hearing here about like the importance of community building. I mean, there's a lot of conversations that need to be taking place here, right? In order to have a collective understanding of how to move forward and the type of messaging that you want to get across and the type of support that you're trying to do. So I also have photos here that speak to Veronica's work. And Veronica, I'd invite you to share a little bit about your entry point into art as a tool to really speak your own truth and build movements as well.
So for me, it started out around 2006, like during high school, the end of high school. I would ride the red line from Wheaton to downtown DC to attend these like immigration rallies that were happening during that time. And I had a digital camera and I would just take a bunch of photos. And I think that was kind of like my entry point to realizing like the power of like image making and storytelling, and just how important it is for us to tell our own stories of our own communities. Because if we don't do it, then someone else will come in and do it for us. And so that was kind of like my entry point to that. I then went to the Corcoran for undergrad, and I studied photojournalism there. And then I went on to get my master's in photography as well, and specifically in like photo book arts. And so all of this, like within my undergraduate thesis and my graduate thesis, my photos that I made, like the projects that I graduated with, all kind of centered around Washington, DC, and growing up in and around DC and the communities that I found in this area, and also my relationship with the city and how it's changing so fast. And so I guess this slide here, the top right photo is like of my undergraduate thesis that was called Le pido a Dios que no me olviden, which is me just photographing like my Central American community in the DMV, mostly in Wheaton. But I photograph my family a lot and the spaces that they occupy in and around DC. And yeah, I think that was like, I realized how important it was and how special it was to have such unfiltered access to my own community, and how grateful, I was really grateful that everyone just allowed me to photograph them. Like my family just like completely allowed me in, and I was able to capture a lot of moments that even now, like a lot of these places don't exist anymore. And that wasn't even that long ago, you know, because Wheaton is also getting very gentrified as well, and it's changing super fast. So a lot of these spaces don't exist anymore. So I just also, in the process of doing that project, realized how important it is to like archive our stories in the spaces that used to exist and the places that we used to call home. And because once that's gone, I feel like it's very easy, especially in the city where it's changing so fast, it's very easy for people to forget what and who used to be there. So that was my undergraduate thesis. And these other photos you see here are from my graduate thesis, which was, it's called Federal City. And I feel like it kind of goes from being like a more romanticized feeling of like community to like this other project where I was already just like so jaded and bitter about just how where DC was going in terms of, I just felt really alienated within a city that I used to feel very at home at. And that's kind of the inspiration to this project. And these bottom photos are kind of, are these sort of like CGI created things that you find around condos that are being built, as an example of like, this is how you'll look if you live here, which also coincidentally, like this bottom left photo is one that I took that is where that old movie theater used to be in Ontario in Adams Morgan. Which when I speak to my family about Adams Morgan, that's always something that comes up. They're like, oh, like I've seen it. Like I used to go there and watch Vicente Fernandez movies. Like it was the best, but then it was gone. And I'm just like, damn, like I didn't realize like that there was a movie theater there and how dope like that would be if that still was there, but now it's condos. But of course, like, you know, they left the movie sign, so it's fine, you know. So yeah, I think a lot of my work is reflective of my relationships, my complex relationships with the city, and my illustration work as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and here we have illustration work where you document some of the day-to-day things that we still see, right? Like these small stores, some might call bodegas, others might call grocery stores that have been in the community for a very long time, but the histories really haven't been, they might be documented in some oral histories here or there, but they're just not really that well known or cemented in a broader community based understanding, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, if you would like to talk a little bit more about like what it means for you to document these objects, and if you'd like to even push that further to like what did the creation of like La Horchata zine mean to you in holding the space?
Sure, yeah. So the illustrations come from a project called Iconic, and it's essentially just sort of like making these like everyday house products that mean so much more than just like a cleaning solution or a bag of like flour, you know. These objects become symbolic of how we make home in this country. You know, like maseca isn't like how they make tortillas back home, but like here, this is like the thing that we've gravitated towards, and this thing symbolizes like making tortillas and reminds me of like being little making tortillas with my mom, you know. Like, so when I've made this, throughout making that project, I've learned that like everyone that seems to respond to the object that I've been drawing has their own personal histories and like stories that they associate those objects with. And it's been really amazing to hear everyone's stories through just these objects that don't even have the names on them, but everyone can like already identify them, and if they respond to them, and they have their own like familial ties to them. But yeah, so with La Horchata zine, it's this like growing up in the DMV, I grew up in such a tight knit, like not tight knit, but like you know, the DC area has the like largest, most concentrated population of Salvadorans in the U.S. And you know, growing up in sort of the thick of that, I felt like I didn't meet a Central American professor or artist till I was in college, you know, and that lack of representation within the arts world, or the contemporary arts world, all of it really, it just propelled me to like create La Horchata zine with my friend Kimberly Benavides. We felt like the lack of representation, not only in the fine arts like art scene, but also in the printed publication world for arts as well. And so we created this magazine, and we do open calls, and we thought we would just have like a few artists that represent the Central American diaspora within the DMV that we would like call, and we would like get them to submit artwork. But it grew from being like just 6 of us from the DC area to it's become like worldwide. So now we have people from the Central American diaspora, not only throughout the US, but like in places like the UK, Uruguay, somebody from Australia, like, you know, it's grown globally. But yeah, I think that also comes from just growing up in this area and just seeing like how many of us are here occupying this space, but how little representation we have in certain spaces, even within the city and within DC's art scene as well too.
Yeah. And you also shared some posters that you make, I mean, that really talk to the ongoing issues, right? And this is a not so sort of reminder of the fact that activism is not something that just exists in the history books, or when it comes to Adams Morgan and DC as well. Like, this is something that, you know, you all are really representative of, like I said, this long genealogy of folks who are making claim to space and are learning and figuring out how to organize based on the issues that are currently affecting a lot of folks in the area. So thank you for sharing this as well. And these are things that I'm guessing could be seen in a public space.
Yeah, so I try my best to wheat paste them around the city. I also sell the posters, but I primarily make them to paste them around where people, it's almost like kind of like a reminder that like we're still out here. Like the city is becoming very white in spaces where maybe it wasn't before, and it's changed so fast. But I like to place these in very strategically placed locations where I know that it's like, okay, like someone's gonna see this, like getting off of work or something, and be like, all right, like that, like we're still here. You know, there's people that feel the same, you know, as you in regards to these issues.
Yeah. So
all about taking up space, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that said, it's 6:36. We still have to 7 p.m. We do have a question coming in from the audience, which says, there's such a shame. It's such a shame that radio CPR doesn't exist anymore. And this audience member would like to know if there are any plans for similar initiatives.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I can share some. I think like what Vero was just talking about really resonates with me in terms of like taking up space, in terms of like public conversations, albeit like through wheat pasting, through physical presence, through presence on the airwaves, and so many more, like through organizing in-person meetings, even in a distanced way right now, through block partying it up with masks on your block, which for my block has been like the mutual aid that we choose. And for me, that's like that way that purpose gets played out is going to mutate and change based on the context and our circumstances, and like how we figure out the best ways to connect with each other and affect change. I think it's beautiful that radio CPR lasted so long. I think there were questions along the way too of like, this is an act of civil disobedience. Like, is our purpose still what our purpose began as? How has it mutated? How do we want it to mutate? And the point is not to have this like permanent thing. The point is to be like working towards justice in these ways or in these other ways, in the ways that we can. In that moment, we had this donated space with supportive community members and capacity, and shop owners who would like play the radio station all up and down the street. And so it was this vehicle for conversation and change and community building. And I think like overturning the voluntary agreements was one huge turning point where like the identity of the radio station changed, not for the worse, but you have to acknowledge like your purpose. So I'm really excited about like all the ways that folks are trying to communicate, build, convey, take up space. And like, for me, I've learned a lot from picking up the Untitled zine and getting to see like the art that people put up around the city that start those conversations I didn't even know were happening. And that'll often be like the first way that I can. And for Maracuya too, we paste posters, not because like those people were necessarily going to come to our parties, but because it was this way of like interrupting the signal a little bit, and taking up that mini space with like, maybe somebody never knew about this artist and now they're going to go like support this independent person trying to live off their music who doesn't have space in the music industry because of racism, etc. So that would be my answer for that, even if incomplete.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Christy. And Manuel, I mean, I know that you're engaging with a number of projects right now in terms of taking up space in the airways, and I think it'd be dope if you're interested, if you would be willing to share a little bit about that, because you're engaging with issues that are very poignant to society right now in the midst of the Black Lives Matter movement y las vidas negras importan, right? So if you want to share a little bit about what you've been up to these days.
You talking about like the podcast or the documentaries, or which ones?
Whichever one you feel.
So we have two podcasts right now. We currently working on Negro Metraje, which is a podcast just filmmaking in Latin America and ways that they look at Black Latinidad and the way that they, film Black Latinos in Latin America, and really analyzing it and bringing it forward to today. We also have Las Caras Lindas podcast, which is basically solely about DC Afro Latinos community. I will say the DMV, because I don't want to leave other Afro Latinos who, because of gentrification have been pushed out to PG and Mo County. So Caras Lindas just talks about Black Latinos history in Washington, DC, and the DC metro area, and ways that, again, they make contributions to the different organizations and institutions in DC. And DC Afro Latino Caucus is more of the policy, more of the organizing, and Las Caras Lindas podcast is more of the vocal, telling our narratives our way, kind of.
Cool, I appreciate that.
Yes.
Yeah, so I wanted to just open the table really to see if there's anything anyone in the panel would like to share with regards to like what would you all see as like the state of Latinx organizing in this moment. I mean, we are celebrating the history of organizing and cultural activism and belonging and creating community in Annis Morgan. We also, hearing you all speak and through our personal experiences, we know that gentrification has made it so that the heart of the community is still symbolically there in Annis Morgan, but we're also like on a more regional level connected in different ways. So I really just wanted to see if there's anything you have in mind with regards to what the state of Latinx organizing is. What are some of your observations? What are some things that you would like to see happen? What are some things from elders who you feel we should be learning from and pushing forward, agendas or objectives or anything that you feel should be talked about in this moment? And that might be a big question. This is a small snippet of millennial organizers in DC and the DMV at large, but I really just wanted to open the floor to see if there's any dialogue that can emerge from that.
I can share like one thing that I'm thinking of, and I saw the question in the chat. I think I understand it. But I think one thing that we've all talked about kind of like in our own conversations on the side, because we are all connected in different ways, has been like, what does mutual aid look like and mean in this moment, but also like in general, and the differences of mutual aid versus like charity work. I think that's like a hard system to shift because of capitalism. And I also think it's really important if people want to think about what, like going beyond guilt or shame or hand-wringing to affect change and like resist further displacement and gentrification in the ways that you're talking about. I got to like reread Audre Lorde this week and think about like my first radio CPR show was like The Personal is Political. It was like called Late Night Confessions, and how are like these everyday experiences very political. But I also think like her lessons and like larger Black feminism as a body of work, what it teaches us is like how our liberation is bound up in each other's. And I think that is like the huge shift from like a charity model of like, oh, I'll assuage my guilt by giving money, but not like actually relinquishing resources in a way that is in a like a truly solidarity model. So that's one thing I'd offer. I know we had, I don't know how the chat works with the YouTube. We had some pieces we were going to put out there. DC has some incredible mutual aid work that's happening, and that then is connected to other work that is also like talking about abolition, you know, like also rooted in Black feminists' work. The 8 to Abolition manifesto that is out there has been like a conversation that's happening in DC mutual aid networks, and I think is also bound up in the same questions about gentrification and displacement, the they them collective, No Justice, No Pride, like doing incredible work. And shout out, Manny, you mentioned Alicia Sanchez Gill, who was you know, a lot of us worked in Insight DC together, which was also looking at like street harassment and displacement, and how the police are involved in both of those and like linked through those. And she's done like she was part of Insight DC, has also been a part of huge movements work along a lot of these lines. So the last thing I would say, sorry to ramble a bit on this, is just like to the question of like, what can people do? I think like putting resources towards platforming folks of like, if I'm asking you to speak, I'm providing like a stipend and providing like adequate resources and time to make that happen in like a respectful and sustainable way is something that we all were talking about. But it's something that I think like structurally is a huge struggle and then turns out to be like really repressive, erasing and silencing as well. So that would be like one thought, I think, related to the questions.
Sorry, I was on mute. For anyone tuning in on YouTube, I'm not sure if you can see the questions, but one of the questions that was submitted is like, for what other support can be provided to make space for this type of organizing and projects be more loudly, be heard in the community, have that stronger presence, especially those largely responsible for gentrification.
Yeah, so in a similar like vein, Christy, like we were saying, just like providing platform, right? That's like so important, and like just providing space, you know, like it can be so simple as just like, you know, recognizing that there are like local creatives that live in the community that maybe you're throwing a festival in, and maybe you should like lower costs for those creatives to take up space within the festival and have tables at, you know, it's very simple like solutions that can affect direct change, you know. You know, you open up a gallery in a predominantly like POC neighborhood, but the only artists that you're representing and showing are white, you know. That's problematic, and like it can be really easily changed by like just doing a little bit of research of who occupied these spaces before you and why it's so important to represent them also in these like fine art spaces or, you know, what have you. But yeah, I think it's just about like also just like educating yourself as to like who and what was there before you.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like even we're still going through that educating phase, right? Like folks who have these familial ties to the neighborhood, because I speaking of my personal experience in PG County, not one time was I presented with a history book that was representative of the communities that I navigated on a day-to-day basis, right? So these are, you know, these are things that are still in motion, histories, cultures, experiences, art that, you know, I think that you as a collective, you're like in the vanguard of a group that's really creating and producing things to really have that step towards really having a more better grounding as to these histories, I would think. What do y'all think about that? Like, what do you see as your role in this current cultural and political moment? You know, earlier today at noon, they were talking about the creation of a Latino festival. When the city didn't even recognize the presence of Latina, Latino, Latinx, Hispanic, Spanish, Latin, whatever terminology you'd use, folks, right? And I think that right now there's a kind of a parallel going on where now, even though there is a Latino and Hispanic marker in the census form, that representation and those histories and those cultures and those lived experiences are not understood to the full, breadth, the fullness of it all. And I see you as contributors to making sure that these things are not falling by the wayside. So. Yeah, so we still have 10 minutes left in the panel, and I want to invite anyone else who may be tuning in on YouTube or Zoom to submit questions to see if we can hear more thoughts from our panelists and organizers. Or maybe if you all have any more thoughts that you'd like to conclude on and conclude with in the last 10 minutes. I know that Christy put a comment out to support the Ward 4 Mutual Aid on Zoom for anyone who may be logged in. Manny also mentioned that one way you can support the visibility of Afro-Latinx histories is to maybe perhaps speaking with your local representative about having this, the street name change to Casita Luna Way as a way to memorialize the history and the contributions of someone whose presence has been long felt by multiple generations in the city. Is there anything else that anyone would like to add?
And during the time that we want to change all these names on all these buildings, maybe we could start naming some of these names to at least one for Casita Luna, to make sure that her legacy still lives. I know there's a lot of Latinos that should be named. Some street names should be named to some Latinos in these streets, but let's start with Casita Luna. And if you all there's a petition online, all you have to put is Casita Luna Way, and you'll see the petition on change.
And of course, another way you can support one of the creatives here is through looking up La Horchata Zine. Veronica and Kimberly, co-founders of La Horchata Zine, really wonderful platform. I have a few of those magazines myself, and please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, Veronica, but this might be one of the only or one of the first platforms available for artists of Central American ancestry throughout the world who is in communication with each other.
Yeah, as far as I know. We also right now we have a show up at the University of Maryland called Connected Diaspora, and it's Connected Diaspora, Central Americans, visuality in the age of social media. So it's kind of how social media has connected us as the diaspora, and it's artists that are found throughout the U.S. And it was previously at Duke University, but now it's at UMD. The pandemic is making things a little bit tricky in terms of actually seeing it in person. We're hopeful that next week it's going to open in person, and you can reserve slots to come check it out at the gallery in the Stamp Student Union building. But there's also going to be a ton of programming virtually for the exhibit. There's going to be panel discussions. There's going to be like a keynote speech by Kenzie Cornejo, which is like maybe like one of the only like Central American art historians that I know in the US. And so it's going to be really great. It's going to be like a really lovely celebration of like what the community is creating, like contemporary, like it's, it's changing the conversation from, just making it more present, because we're all creatives and we're doing things now in the present. And this is like putting a spotlight on all of that. And so you can tune into that. There's going to be some Zoom panels and also an IG Live, and then a dance party to close it off, all virtually. So, yeah.
Can you repeat the title, Veronica, of the exhibit?
It's called Connected Diaspora. Yeah.
And this Connected Diaspora, I had the pleasure of seeing it in person at Duke, and it really is representative of I mean, what Central America is, like, from different vantage points, different identities, different experiences, and it's on a racial, ethnic, national, gender, sexuality level. I mean, it's a really great exhibit. So I really do encourage any viewers out there to make your way over to Maryland. I know that it might seem like it's far away, but it really isn't. Green Line is right there in Columbia Heights. Yeah, so anything else? I mean, I know that on my end and as a collective, we're all working, and not just us, but like a host of individuals. I mean, there's other organizations out there who are led by millennial Latinx folk. One that comes to mind is like Creating Casa, right? Of like, who are really looking at our own histories and lived experiences and going through our family archives and really wanting to learn about the public and private spaces that we've been navigating on a day-to-day basis. And that's something that I'm very invested in as well, so that we can have a better idea of, and for me, it's like food, right? So like Salvadoran restaurants and the public spaces in DC, like when did parks names get changed to Parque de la Paloma, you know what I mean? Or like things of that nature. So please, for anyone that's tuning in, stay tuned, because there's a lot more great work to be produced by folks who really do have a lot of love for the communities that they're engaging with.
Jose, if you or Veronica or anybody else has any links that you all want to share, I can put them in the YouTube description. So either send those over via email. Christy, I got yours that you sent in the chat. I'll make sure that I put those in the description. But any other ones that you all want to share, we're more than happy to.
Sounds great.
And in terms of like your question, Jose, about like what we see as our role, I think just like a really important piece of Latinx organizing in general is like addressing anti-Blackness within the Latinx community and also like in general. And I think that's something where we're seeing uprisings and participating in uprisings against police murders and genocide on Black people. And there's a really important place to like look towards Latinx community organizing and like where we need to build there, especially people who really need to grow, and like whole communities we need to grow in terms of that distance and erasure from Blackness. And I also think like really questioning what that participation and putting yourself and your resources and sometimes your body on the line for justice looks like. And I think that's like continue to keep interrogating, even if the media stops covering those uprisings, that's still happening. What does it look like to show up for Black and Latinx trans people? And like that distancing from the comfort of just being like, oh, well, I'm okay. And I don't hear or see anything going on. And I think we've talked together about like the racist implications of COVID and how some of what we see happening around us also has direct impact on our communities disproportionately. I think those are like kernels of thought that in the what is my role are definitely like going through my head. And I know we've all had conversations about this too. So just want to bring that forward as well as like central and probably priority through all of the work.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That is very true. And I really do think that this is a really interesting space to live, because it's, here in this panel, I didn't say it in the beginning, but we have representation of folks from Central America, the Caribbean, South America. So I always ask myself, what does it mean to be in conversation, a dialogue, when a lot of our families have had very traumatic pasts, right? And like our arrival to Washington, D.C. many times is a traumatic experience. For others, it's not as traumatic, but we end up occupying these same spaces. And what does it mean really to have conversations about our own lived experiences and in the process of creating community, right? Under this Latina, Latino, Latinx label. And then how do you move forward? So these are all great conversations that I think that kind of gets lost when folks think of Washington, D.C., especially folks who are not from the area and immediately think of, downtown D.C. But Yeah. So we have one last minute. I don't know if there are any other thoughts from Manny or Veronica.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.
I just want to jump in. Jose, anybody watching this, I can't recommend enough watching this in tandem with the 12 o'clock session this morning, the struggle and resistance, the making of Adams Morgan. The two of these together really paint an awesome picture of Adams Morgan, and what perfect timing to do this on Adams Morgan Day, to see those two sessions, the Hola Cultura session this morning. It's been really great to see the history of Adams Morgan coming together. So thank you all for contributing to it. And I hope people get a lot out of watching all of these sessions. So thank you.
Thank you all for your time. I appreciate it.
All right, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. And